Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is John Blake. I am the Head of Education and Social Reform here at Policy Exchange, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here this evening for the launch of this, I think, important and timely book. I'm very grateful to see such a diverse and interesting crowd. So, those of you who are noticing very carefully will have seen that our star speaker, Nicky Morgan, has arrived. You will obviously all know Nicky as currently the chair of the Treasury Select Committee, but also formerly Secretary of State for Education and MP for Loughborough, and she is the author, and she will shortly get up and speak a little bit about her work and about her thoughts on character education and so on. You may have noticed that at the moment we have an Antony Seldon shaped hole in the event, and that is unfortunately an event at Buckingham, a sort of a slightly odd emergency at Buckingham has prevented him getting the earlier train. So he's currently, he's told me that he has literally just leapt off a train at Euston and is now making his way through rush hour London. So I imagine he will arrive fresh to give us an idea about what character and resilience really mean. I think the recent discussions on education in the past few years, in which Policy Exchange has been a significant player, have touched a great deal on the role and importance of high-quality, knowledge-rich education for all. And I think that's why it's so valuable to have here this evening somebody who was intimately involved in advancing that education reform project as Secretary of State, but also to talk about other aspects of education that are significant and important. And as my predecessor in this role, Jonathan Simons, who is now the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Varkey Foundation, says in his introductory quote for this book, the key point that a true one-nation government needs to equip all its children with knowledge and character is one that is too infrequently recognised. And I think it's very positive that we'll be recognising that here this evening. I think reading through the book, I think one of the things that struck me, before I began this role at Policy Exchange, I was a teacher for 10 years. And I think one of the really standout points for me is the importance of resilience for children, and the lesson that success does not come easy or cheap. And I was struck by the passage on a programme I have watched and do very much enjoy, but it does say that it's why reality TV shows like X Factor are so misleading. They make success look too instant and too easy. It would be good to give more exposure to just how long the bands and singers on the X Factor have been performing without any public attention before they hit the so-called big time. And as someone whose dream of X Factor performance is probably long since gone, I very much take that to heart. And I think it's important that we have these conversations about what kind of people we want to emerge from our schools, as well as the things that we want them to know. But in particular, I was also struck by something that Nicky said in her introduction. And she says, change in education doesn't happen by accident. It needs a deliberate push. Public awareness needs to be raised. Government needs to make it clear to those in the education system that this is a priority and they will support it. And most importantly, the front line, namely schools, heads, teachers, governors and communities, need to be enabled to create the conditions to allow systematic change to happen, to take hold and to grow. And I think that is of fundamental importance. And the commitment to building a schools-led system in which our school leaders, teachers and students can take forward their work with the support of policymakers is very important. But of course, it's also essential that we continue to discuss that policy and to pay close attention to how that policy impacts on all those people in the system. And that's why I'm so pleased to see so many of you here this evening and why I'm delighted to welcome Nicky to talk about her work. Thank you.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm here as the warm-up act for Antony Seldon. Those of you who have worked with him will know that this is not an unusual occurrence. In fact, I watched Gary and Ruth only, a couple of months ago, July, as Gary was the warm-up act. So, Gary, if I get really desperate, you're going to come up here now and talk. Now, you'll have to forgive me. I'm going to get some water because those of you who attend party conferences will also know that it is de rigueur for you to have a cold at party conference season. And if you don't have a cold at the start of party conference season, you will have a cold by the end of party conference season. But I have managed to do this before we have even got to party conference season, unless, of course, there are some Liberal Democrats amongst you, in which case As I've just asked one of them, they should be in Bournemouth rather than here in London, so they'll have to explain to their party hierarchy why they are not there.
It was worth the visit, Nicky.
Ah, very good.
I've come back specially.
I always liked Bournemouth. I remember Bournemouth being rather sunny and a rather enjoyable place to spend time for party conferences. I'm, of course, looking forward to the journey north to go to Manchester in 2 weekends' time. But first, we're going to start by saying thank you very much to Policy Exchange and to John for hosting this evening's launch. Thank you to Alex. Now, where's Alex? I can't see him. There he is, right at the back. There we are. Thank you, Alex, for publishing the book. It is still a total mystery to my family how anybody was persuaded to publish anything that I had written. And in fact, my husband, who's not here this evening, is actually doing some character building activities at my son's Cubs group, and he did volunteer to swap places so that I would go and do the character building activities there and he could come and talk here, but I refused on your behalf. So thank you, Alex, for bearing with me, and also for bearing with me when there was an unexpected election called. I had promised Alex the draft, not the manifesto. Clearly, could have been a whole different story, couldn't it, had I been drafting that? But I had promised him the draft of the book by the end of June, and then we had the unexpected election. So anybody else who's written the book will know there I was frantically as we were about to go on holiday at the end of July at 1 o'clock in the morning, still trying to proofread the book and to get it to him. Can I thank all of you for being here this evening and for being interested? Some of you may be character converts, some of you may be more sceptical, but I'm hoping to persuade you that character education absolutely has its place in our school system, and we've got some great examples here, and I particularly want to say thank you to the schools. I said King's Langley obviously represented here. I think others are. I hope others might be watching. I say in the introduction, or the author's note, that it is quite scary once you've been a schools minister or Secretary of State for Education to go back into schools, partly because they can ask you detailed questions about policy, but also just because that's not your job anymore to visit schools. But I have to say, all of the schools that I approached and asked if I could come and visit were immensely generous with their time, with their contacts, and with sharing their thoughts. And so it's a real pleasure in this book to be able to then highlight some examples, some brilliant examples of what schools up and down the country are already doing in the name of character education. And I suppose I really should also thank Theresa May, because if it hadn't been for the fact that I got my P45 in July 2016, I wouldn't have had time to read a book, to write a book, or to read a book even, because actually when you are a full-time frontline politician with endless red boxes, there really is no time at all in the day. So to have the time to actually write a book on something I felt passionate about, or an area I felt passionate about, was an incredibly was incredibly empowering, and I felt very, very lucky to be able to do it. Now, when I was Secretary of State for Education, we thought very hard, obviously, about the education reforms which my predecessor, Michael Gove, had put in place, which David Cameron felt so passionately about. What were we trying to do? Well, we were trying to prepare young people for life in 21st century Britain. And as John has already said, as we captured in the book, I hope, which is the fact that the acquisition of knowledge is hugely important. And actually, too often in the past, young people were written off and weren't even given the opportunity to acquire knowledge because of assumptions made about their background and about where they lived and about the types of schools that they went to. So that absolutely was something that was right for the Conservative government, in fact the coalition government, to tackle and to lift the standards. But I also felt very passionately, and I've been asked this question in the run-up to tonight and about the book, what was it about character education that you felt so strongly about? And I come at this really as a parent, as a constituency member of Parliament of 7 years standing, as an employer, and as somebody who stood back and watched. What is it about some young people who have that ability to cope with all that life is throwing at them? What is it that we're looking for if you're employing people in the world of work? And actually, those of you who are employers and have interviewed people, you will know that ability to somebody to walk in the room, I talk about this in the book, into an interview, to shake hands, to look you in the eye, to actually come up with perhaps a question at the end or some good answers to the interviews, that does set them apart. And so that then would tend to suggest, well, why is it that we're only giving some young people, those opportunities to develop those skills that are going to stand them in good stead for, as I say, life in the 21st century. So that then led me to think, when I was given this platform of being in the education department, what was it that I wanted particularly to focus on that that the government hadn't had the chance to focus on previously, because of the need to embed all of the other education reforms, particularly obviously around curriculum and teaching and everything else. And the other side, and I do touch on this in the book, is that many of you will know that I am passionate about the issues around mental health. I was very privileged in 2012 to lead the first ever general debate with Charles Walker MP in the House of Commons on mental health. And we all know that there are issues. Those who work in schools, those who work with young people, know that there are issues around young people's mental health, about resilience, and again, having the ability to cope with what is a complicated life. And again, I say in the book that when I went to visit schools, I was often asked by young people, growing up today is much, much harder. You know, why is that? What can be done about it? And in some ways, of course, I think that is right. I think we live in a much busier world, a much more demanding, relentlessly competitive world. Of course, there are opportunities that young people 30, 50, 70 years ago, particularly women, could only dream of at that time, and now those opportunities are there. But it is a different and challenging world, and we want young people to have the skills to be able to cope with it. Now, one of the most memorable visits, and actually all of the visits to the schools were incredibly memorable. They all brought out slightly different things, often talking about the same attributes they wanted young people to develop, but they all did it differently. And I wanted that to be captured in the book, because I don't think there is one way of delivering character education. Antony, welcome. Come and join us. Yes. So I don't think there's one way of delivering character education. And in fact, some people don't talk about it or think about it as character education. The example in the book of St James's Primary School in Stourbridge, who until we had come up with the character awards and the schemes in the department, it wasn't until they went through and thought, yeah, we're doing all of this, but we never talked about it in terms of character. But they realised actually they were trying to develop those skills and those values in their young people. But one of the best visits I did, I think, was to Elizabeth Garrett Anderson School in Islington, where in the book I talk about the executive head, Jo Dibb, who has a very clear vision of what she wants her girls to be able to develop and how she wants them to be able to hold their own with the girls who've been educated in the independent school down the road. And I think probably because of the physical geography of where those schools are, it provides a very useful juxtaposition. But that ability, again, for the girls, and they have lunches and dinners, that ability to chat over the table, to have the confidence to be able to engage in conversation, things that probably people in this room take for granted, that perhaps your parents or somebody else in your life helped to develop. Actually, those things, again, give that self-confidence to be able to succeed in life. Now, writing a book is a good test of character. It's great to see James here, and thank you, James, for all of your encouragement and everything that I've learned from you at the Jubilee Centre and the University of Birmingham. And you break it down into 4 different virtues, I think, that you want people to develop. And I was thinking about that this evening. I mean, writing a book is a good test of persistence. It's easy to say, I'm going to write a book, much, much harder to actually deliver it. So for anybody in the audience who's written a book, I have immense admiration. I have to say, I think being Secretary of State for Education was at times much easier than actually writing a book. It encourages self-reflection, because you have to look at the drafts, and by the time you have read your manuscript for the 50th time, you are heartily sick of it. You just hope that those reading it for the first time won't be heartily sick of it too, but it does encourage self-reflection. I think the development of community, and actually there is a community of those who are particularly engaged in character education. And if my book and the platform that I have is able to give them support, perhaps encouragement to get new ideas out there, to get other people thinking, actually, what could I do to bring character education forward, then so much the better. And also judgment. I have to say, writing a book as a practicing or an ongoing current politician is a bit of a minefield. And I say in the book that one of the things that a lot of those in this field talk about are values. Now, values, or morals, whatever you want to call them, is a really hard place for public policy makers to be, because it's so easy to get it wrong and to appear judgmental. But actually, I think this tends to a wider debate, where perhaps I want to end and be interested in your thoughts and what Antony has to say on it as well. Because I think in this country, and I think perhaps in politics generally in the Western world, there is an issue about values. You know, all of this, I haven't yet mentioned the B word, which I don't particularly want to mention this evening, but it's very difficult to have many public debates at the moment without ending up talking somewhere along the lines about the EU and the referendum vote. You know, why do people vote in that way? Well, as I said in an article for Conservative Home recently, I do think there's a feeling in this country and elsewhere that actually people don't like the way society is developing. And I think that take back control argument really played to that. And I do understand that, and I have some sympathy for that. But having that debate about values is, as I say, very difficult for politicians. I do think it's much more possible for schools and for heads and for governors and for parents to have that debate. And I say in the book that actually in terms of adult role models, obviously parents are absolutely critical. But, you know, James O'Shaughnessy, who wrote the foreword very, very kindly, set up a chain of schools called the Floreat Schools. And flourishing is what we want. We want a society that flourishes, we want young people that flourish, and that's where the development of character and values and virtues is so very, very important. So as a Conservative, it won't surprise you to know that I don't think legislation is the answer. I don't think lots of rules and lots of guidance. I want this to be, and I think it should be, a movement from the ground upwards. And if this book can be a call to parents and to governors, as much as to teachers and head teachers and others engaged in working professionally in schools, then so much the better. I'll just leave you with this. I was in Sainsbury's in Loughborough yesterday, as all good politicians are. Obviously, that's where I meet lots of my electorate. In fact, I've been banned by my husband really from going in with him because it turns into a surgery. So he says, you know, I'll go and do it. You talk to people in the vegetable aisle, and that's about as far as you get. But anyway, there I was, and I bumped into one of our local teachers. And he said, "Oh, Nicky, I'm really looking forward to reading your book. We know lots of it." I said, "That's great, Graham. Thank you so much." And he said, "I said the good news is it's quite short." And he said, "That's even better." He said, "I'm really, really busy. I haven't got time to read a really long book, so I'm going to delve and hopefully get some ideas and put them straight into practice." And that's great. If that's what this does, if this opens up the debate about character education, as I say, gives support to those who have been doing such great work in this field already, and gives other people the opportunity to debate what we want to develop, the virtues, the values, the traits in our young people, then so much the better. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being interested. Those of you who are skeptics, I hope I can win you over. Those of you who are converts, I hope you'll share your experiences. Antony, wherever he's gone, I think it's over to you. Thank you very much.
I think that idea about the importance of unleashing a system in which it's possible for people to have these debates within schools and to construct their own ways forward, I think is really powerful and important. Now, I've always wanted to do this, and I think this is probably the best opportunity to do this, and simply to say our next speaker needs no introduction.
4 years ago, I stood here and we had a debate and at Policy Exchange on character education. Some of you, who here was in the audience for that earlier debate? Who here can't remember whether they were or not? Who here was too drunk to remember? It was a debate which James O'Shaughnessy and I were on, and we lost roundly. Because the overwhelming force of the room was this woolly, subjective thing with no roots in philosophy or psychology or science of character education, was really something that was a distraction from what we needed to do, which was to give people a really solid academic education. And we lost graciously, and here we're back. And this is a great debate, a debate that goes to the very heart of our education system, of our primary, our secondary schools, and indeed our universities. And Nicky Morgan has written a great book. She deeply understands it. And some of you in the room, including James Arthur, were present when Nicky had only been in post for 2 or 3 weeks, and she convened a meeting to say that I believe deeply in an academic education and the right of every single child in this country to have the best possible academic education, but I also believe that education is a moral activity and schools will be better places if we put character not at the bottom of the list or leave it out, but at the heart of schools. So well done, Nicky. 6 things very quickly in my remaining 4 minutes. There's change happening. For change to happen, we have to think of a triangle. We have to think of the people with power. We have to think of the ideas, and we have to think of practitioners. The ideas are now absolutely clear in the work of Marty Seligman, Angela Duckworth, one of the most influential thinkers in the post-war history of the West in education, and indeed in the work, the sensational work of the Jubilee Centre and James Arthur and his team. So we have the ideas. We secondly have increasingly the women and men with power. Nicky's time back in power will come again. Everything turns, and but other people in the department now know instinctively, as any parent knows in their heart, any parent and any great teacher. I ran schools for 20 years. I've been in education for 35 years. I've never met or appointed a single teacher who didn't know at their very heart that education is fundamentally a moral exercise, and that morality needs to be and can be and should be at the heart of what every school does. And thirdly is the practitioners, and we have Gary Lewis here. Who else? Who else? Can I just see who are the other teachers here in the audience? Well, 1 or 2. And so we have King's Langley well represented here. And we need more practitioners, but the practitioners are out there. We know that more and more teachers are becoming interested in this very topic. Point 2 is, what's happening in the world? I mean, wherever you look, you can't open a serious newspaper or journal now without reading about AI. What are these machines going to do? They're increasingly going to take over the sequential work of teaching, all the things that in that machine image of education, Gradgrindian factory system of education that the pessimists, the merciless Gradgrinders have wished on us, that's going to be taken over by these intelligent machines that are going to talk to you in the kind of voice that is most helpful to you, with a higher intelligence and receptivity and ability to read your eyes and your face and your mind and your voice than any teacher's ever done. So what is going to be left? It's coming. It's already here. It's already here in Palo Alto. So what's going to be left is the human quality, the teaching, about what it means to be a human being, what it means to be conscious. And so to deny character education is palpably absurd and unsustainable any longer. Thirdly, we think, don't we, that this is a kind of new faddish thing. This was the kind of argument that was thrown at us. Well, we know, don't we, and Nicky talks about it. This goes back to the very genesis of education. Education has always been, read Aristotle, read everybody, the best minds on education. We know that it's a profoundly moral activity, that the building, the formation of good character, what we now know much more from the work of people like Duckworth, is how to do it optimally. So that's my third point. And fourth is that we had this false dichotomy in the in David Cameron's government that either schools were about the things that really mattered, such as results and league table position, or there was this really psychobabble, dangerous left-wing, mushy pea stuff about well-being and character and resilience, which was deeply insidious and dangerous stuff. And we should never allow it anywhere near our schools. And then there was their real education that they talked about, and that was undermining. Well, none of them have actually ever run a school. Very few of them, the people who believe this dangerous, and I think, ultimately evil philosophy that education, that you can strip out character from education. I think it is evil. I really do. None of them that I've seen have actually been in a school. I know from running schools that what it's about, that it can, must, and should be being done. And then just a couple of other points. Nicky mentioned just there. You must read Nicky's book, by the way. It is fantastic. I'm not just saying that because I've been asked to talk about it. I'm asking you to read it because it's true and it's zippy to read and it's a great read. What we look at is what people do and what they're like rather than what they say. And for teachers to talk about character but then not to mark books properly, not to prepare lessons properly, to go on strike for more money, this gives young people totally the wrong message. If you just reflect for a moment, 5 seconds reflection, who your best teachers were. They will be people who you admired, people who opened your hearts as well as your minds, people who you listened to their words, but you also knew who they were, people you wanted to know more about. These are live flesh and blood human beings, and the same goes for parents too. The moral lead that parents give, much more important is to live the values than to witter on about them and have them up in signs all around the corridors. That's important, but it's the life of the school that matters. It's the culture, it's the quality of care and compassion and rigour and higher standards, very higher standards. No genuinely characterful school or university I know has ever been anything less than rigorous. Look at Catherine Burble-Singh. I was chatting to her a couple of months ago at the end of last term. The absolute enemy of character and all this psychobabble stuff has a fantastic quote from Aristotle on her in her study about the character being at the very essence of her really interesting school, which if you haven't been to see it or read about it, you ought to see. Character runs through everything that she's doing. Everything. It's extraordinary. And just finally, what is education about? Well, Nicky's just referred to it there again. What are we trying to do? We're trying to pass on the best of our culture to our young people, definitely. We're trying to train their minds to think highly intelligently and skillfully. We are developing all their different aptitudes. We are helping them prepare for jobs. That's not the only reason that we have universities, which too many people now think is the only purpose of universities, or indeed education it's part of. We're also trying to help them to become good citizens, good fathers, good mothers, good friends, good people in society. Volunteering needs to be at the absolute heart of a good school. Without exception, the best teachers, the best heads and leaders will be volunteering themselves, probably without letting anybody know that they're volunteering and building a good society. But that inner quality, they have something that we ignore far too often, which is called substance. We know, don't we, when we're with somebody who is somebody who's got substance. They are good and they do good. So it's indivisible. I think the debate that we're going to go on to, and John, do you want me to ask Nicky a question, is just, and forgive me because this is very distressing. I was going to be on time, and I wasn't because somebody was attacked on my university, and we are actually, the Guardian says, we're the safest campus in Britain. I don't think we'll probably lose it following this. It was really horrible and very upsetting. So that's why I was late. So you may have said this, Nicky, in which case please forgive me, but how do we best, do you think, to sceptics, how do we best convince them that this is not the enemy of what's fantastically important, which is giving every single child an academic education, regardless of their disadvantaged background, whatever it may be, that this is the ally, the friend of, that it underpins, not undermines, great academic education for all?
Well, Antony, thank you very much indeed for your words. You know, I think you've got to the heart of it. And actually, when I went and visited all the schools, I think probably Gary, and if there were others, the heads were here, I asked all of the heads, you know, do you think that your students do better academically because of the character work that you do, because of the traits and the values that you help to deliver? And all of them, and these are experienced heads. They weren't there. They're not there just to tell the ex-Secretary of State what she wants to hear. And all of them, without exception, said yes. And one of the I think ongoing issues and debates is, how do you measure character? Should you measure character? And I talk about that in the book. But all of these experienced educationalists said absolutely yes. And so I think if you needed any better, if all this flourishing and all this values and everything else, morals, is a bit, as you said, Antony, soft and fluffy, then for those who are still very much focused on the acquisition of knowledge, I think the fact is that building character helps young people to have the confidence, the ability to reflect on their lessons, to take the time, to take responsibility for their own learning, that then improves their academic attainment.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Antony, for that sort of fascinating tour de force there. We're now going to open the floor up to questions. If I can ask you to keep your questions short and to the point, because we are going to try and save 10 minutes at the end, so that those of you who may have seen that Nicky's book is available at the back of the room at the extraordinarily reasonable price of £10 whole. Buy it now. Then you can. Then Nicky will be able to sign it. So the precision in your questions will be an advantage, and then more of you can get it signed. So it's very much in your hands, I think. I can already see. I'm just going to point this out here. Chris Waterman is going to get the first question, largely because he turned up to the last event that we ran the other week and told me that he was definitely going to ask a question. I said, "Well, what will you do if I don't call on you?" And he says, "Well, you may not call on me, but I'm definitely going to ask a question." So I think we'll just start here. But if we take them in threes, have I got anyone else? One here, and then one here. We'll take the front, and then we'll try at the back a bit.
Thanks. Chris Waterman. I run the all-party parliamentary group for the teaching profession, and I've been in education slightly longer than Antony. I think it's now 64 years, with just a 2-year break in the private sector. I'd like to begin with a quote from your book. Emphasis has already been made on the need for a whole government approach to character education and the adoption of key values which everyone, from the Prime Minister, the Cabinet and the MPs, work to demonstrate. So another way of assessing progress to assess the whole government and gain some form of external recognition. I've adapted the words a bit.
I don't recognise that quote. I have read it 50 times, so I do know literally every word in the book. But I like the paraphrasing.
And I'm quite interested. There was obviously a lacuna in the 1970s in character education when Michael Gove, Boris Johnson and Liam Fox were born. But let's move on from that. What I'm interested in is in some research that your ex-department did, 97% of schools said they sought to promote desirable character traits, but only 54% knew what character education was. So the serious question is, where is the taxonomy and how do we give people the language to know whether they want to do it and whether they're doing it and how well they're doing it? Simple question.
That's great, yeah.
Chris Belker, I'm chairman of the Conservative Transport Group. I've got a very simple question. How do we avoid indoctrination of alien values? And I've got in mind those that lead to terrorism and those kind of things, because it seems to be gaining momentum rather than being fought and pushed off in some way.
Thank you.
Ian Orr, I'm a retired diplomat and the father of a geography teacher whose wife is a Chinese teacher. Simple question, is a national curriculum necessary or an obstacle to the development of character in teachers and students?
Well, 3 fantastic questions. So thank you very much indeed. I think, Chris, you're absolutely right. And I thought there was very interesting, that research at the end. And it goes back to what I was saying about when we started the Character Awards, many schools, if you said to them, are you doing character education, would have said no. And then they looked at the criteria and thought, yes, we are actually, according to this. And I say in the book very clearly that we tried, certainly the DfE, never to define what we meant by character education, because then we would support a debate about that, not about what was going on. And you know, when you talk about taxonomy, I talk about Giordano's school in Bristol, who talked about developing a taxonomy of effort. And so I think what I'm saying in the book is, and I think what James has been doing is saying, look, every institution has its own ethos and is developing character. You know, even those who work at the Policy Exchange are picking up character traits from those in leadership. I'll leave you to debate that afterwards, John. You can debate that with Dean, wherever he is. So let's make this explicit. Let's not just have it by accident, but let's really think about the traits that want to be developed. And now that takes time, it takes effort. I don't think it should all be down to teachers and to staff. I think the role of governors and parents is absolutely vital in all this, and students, you know, particularly at secondary level as well, to think about this. And I guess, you know, that's the balance between what can, whether it's DfE or other institutions. I think the Jubilee Centre do this very, very well. And if this book and others things promote a national debate about character in education, then so much the better. And already I've had some great comments from people, teachers and heads who have picked up the book and are saying, well, you know, what do we do next? And I say at the end of the book, over to you. No, that's the challenge. And in terms of values, I mean, you're right. When I was Education Secretary, obviously this whole issue about British values, and we continue to debate it today. What do we mean by that? Why do we have them? I thought very clearly, I think that the values identified as British values could be used in many other, they're not British exclusively, but what we're saying, I think what David Cameron was rightly saying was, look, as a country, we need to have some core values we want everybody to demonstrate, because if we don't talk about that and we become very inarticulate about talking about values, and again I talk about that in the book a bit, then other people, we leave a vacuum and other people will insert their values. You know, I think all values, there's probably a flip side, there's probably a big philosophical debate. Values of tolerance, you know, are very good, but like everything in life, what was it, Winston Churchill, everything in moderation. So, you know, it tips over then sometimes into being used in the wrong way. But I still think it's right that we have a debate about British values and national values that want to be developed. And in terms of the national curriculum, well, I think one of the things about the academy programme is that, of course, academies, and the reason I am still a great fan of the academy system, is that actually many schools teach over and above the national curriculum and actually use it as a sort of a base. And I think there is nothing in the national curriculum that would say there is no space for character, and it goes back to, in a way, to answering Antony's question, which was actually in order to assist and support academic attainment, to assist and support in the teaching of the national curriculum, and above and beyond that, actually that's where character and the debate about character, and again in the book I give some examples, some from King's Langley, some from elsewhere, of where actually you can have, within a national curriculum framework, you can have a lesson, but actually you're not necessarily talking about the content of the lesson, the pure knowledge, I suppose, being acquired. You can actually talk about character in the context of all kinds of different lessons. And I think that, again, hopefully supports teachers as professionals to be able to use their professional judgment in how they want to talk about character in the context of the subject that they are teaching. I don't know if, Antony, you've got anything you want to add?
I would only add that at the end of the day we can do our deep work about the taxonomy of virtues, but at the end of the day there will always be something intuitive about it, just like all those who are parents or godparents or aunts and uncles here in the audience recognise something about goodness that is profoundly human. And those people who plant bombs on tubes, those people who are unkind to each other in the playground or at work are not embodying that sense of goodness. And intuiting what goodness is and having debates about it is part of moral education. So yes, we can do lots of work, but there is something that will transcend any empirical study at the end that defines what it is to be a human being.
Okay, I think we have time for at least one more round. Is there anyone here who wants to stand up and defend the merciless Gradgrindians?
Yes, come on.
Where's Nicky?
Or indeed any other questions? Lady here?
Yes.
Antonia Cox, I'm one of the founders of a free school, Marylebone Boys School. I'm one of the founders of a free school, Marylebone Boys School, where we have character education. The deputy head puts it into a taxonomy of resourcefulness, reciprocity, resilience and reflection. The head prefers to think of teaching the boys to be good fathers, just not too soon. Which of those two approaches would you prefer?
Oh!
And gentleman at the back in the jump. Yep.
Ladies can also ask.
We know that in...
Sorry, could you let us know your name and your
sorry,
organisation?
Julian Astral, and I'm from the RSA. We know that in high-stakes accountability systems, what gets measured tends to get done, and what doesn't get measured tends not to get done. And I'm just interested, when something that people feel strongly about doesn't get measured, and they worry that it'll therefore be marginalised, they sometimes call for it to be measured. And I'm just interested to know whether or not you think that we should start measuring either attainment, achievement or progress in character education, and whether if we did so that would be to aid teachers, in other sort of diagnostic purpose, formative assessment, or whether in fact it would become part of the wider school accountability system.
I think there was one more question.
Hi, Sam Butters, Director of the Fair Education Alliance. So I was interested in your perspectives on the importance of character education or lack thereof for disadvantaged pupils compared to their wealthier peers. And you also mentioned the example of the private school down the road in Islington, and whether you think it's something that private schools do well compared to comprehensives.
Well, again, three excellently challenging questions, which there is no right answer, which is in one way good, and in other ways even more challenging. I go back to what I said, which is we were very careful, and I think it's right, that me as a politician or as a commentator or as an author shouldn't be saying this is the only way to do character education. There will be bodies who have a view on that, and I think it's right that the schools, again, going back to where we were in our school reforms, which we've got to trust the frontline professionals. Now, there will be an interesting debate, actually. I suppose the only thing I would perhaps say on that is that within a school, or a set of schools, I would guess you probably want the senior leadership to agree between themselves what they're looking for, rather than to have differences. And it may very well be that actually these two do fit together and it's clear. But I think for governors and for parents and for staff and for pupils, it's important they know what it is that they're being asked to fulfil. And actually a good example, something else to say is it's not just for pupils. It's for staff as well. Again, when I went around the schools, it was really interesting where they talked about the character opportunities to develop and to think about character, to self-reflect, for staff too. And one of the schools was saying that they felt that was incredibly important in helping them to recruit and to retain staff. Because at the end of the day, I think I said in the book, why would you not want to work for an employer that wants to invest in you and your flourishing as much as the pupils' flourishing that you're looking after? In terms of measurement, Julian, it's a really good question. And there is a chapter on this because you're right, Whitehall mantra, what gets measured gets done. But my concern, I think, is that if we were to try to measure character as character, I think it's almost impossible to do. And I think it would squeeze out all of the innovation, the creativity, and going back to the point about trusting the professionals at the front line. But interestingly, in some of the schools, that there are proxy measures. So things like attendance, Destination data, I think, is going to be important. Feedback, I guess, from parents and from others, perhaps in terms of work experience, looking at the participation of young people in other activities, Duke of Edinburgh, sport, volunteering, cadets, whatever it might be. But there's just the age-old summary on your school report by your teacher and by your head teacher as to the sort of person that you are. And I don't think it's any secret. I think it was in Red Box a while ago. I think I gave an interview. My school report when I was 3 said if she spent less time worrying about what other people were up to and more time worrying about what she was up to, she might get a bit further in life. And I'm not entirely sure 41 years later whether that should have changed. But I think so. My worry is if you measure it, it would get lost. But there are some tools, and again, we talk about this in the books. And I think your question about disadvantage, I feel very strongly about this, and I talk about this being part of a one nation education policy, because I do think the independent sector, many of them, not all again, and I don't think we should in the British school system, or the English school system, I suppose, I don't want it to be independents do this well and state schools don't, because actually we've got with King's Langley, with King's Leadership Warrington, with the University of Birmingham School, with Gordana, all the schools, and many that I don't cover in the book, are doing character education absolutely brilliantly. They're taking it really seriously and they're making it work. But I do also talk about the access, and again I see Chris Patterson is here. He is the one that gave me the Putnam book, Our Kids, which talks from an American perspective about the access to both good teachers but also extracurricular activities, and again how those often from disadvantaged backgrounds aren't getting that access. And again, that's something I think that government could help. I talk in the book about the budget from 2016, where George Osborne had put in money for a longer school day and actually asking schools to bid. Again, another example, going back to British values, the schools in Luton, which have set up their own scout and cub groups, and again, I find that very helpful. So I do think that's where government could be deliberate in terms of making sure that access to schemes and thinking about the development of character traits is definitely, in the same way we want, as Antony said, all pupils to have an excellent education, we want them all to have an excellent character education too.
So, I mean, it's Nicky's book, and I won't go precisely down the 3 questions, because Nick has done it much better than I would. I think we're talking about substance, and I think that if we think about people, and this act of reflection, which is a key word in character education, which a lot of education doesn't have time for, but reflection, stillness is at the heart of every good school that I know. If you reflect on people who have substance, politicians, think tankers, entrepreneurs, local government people, doctors, substance is something that is absolutely recognisable. It's like goodness. We all know where we meet a woman or a man, a girl or a boy with substance, and we are drawn to that person, and that person will have their values at their very heart. What are we trying to develop? I think we're trying to develop both taxonomies of virtues but also good parents. Why are we not teaching our young people how to be good parents? Is that not a valuable part of school? Where will they learn how to be good parents unless there are some things that are taught at school? From television, from films, really? From the internet, really? Is that going to help them learn how to be good parents? We don't even teach them how to be good students. So what happens is they're coming up at the moment to Freshers' Week, and you're getting, if you're reading in the Sunday papers, wristbands now, where very thoughtful, caring universities now give people wristbands so that when the students get so completely wasted, there'll be somebody to identify them and take them back to their university residences. Oh, that's so enlightened, isn't it? Why are we not teaching young people about excess, about self-control? Why do so many young people who come through our factory system of education think that it's a badge of honour to be wasted, to so trash your mind that there's no cognitive content left in your mind, and that is the absolute aim? Why are we not teaching our young people what is right and truthful and honest and what is wrong? These things, both of them are incredibly important. It's not what we say, it's who we are. look at the figure utterly venerated, and I don't mean this remotely cynically, by Gordon Brown, by people of the left and the right, Aung San Suu Kyi, and look at her treatment of the Rohingya. It is not possible to be a Buddhist and to react the way that she has. It is not in line with being a good person. You can't say these things. You can't win Nobel Prizes and then act like that. It's what we do that matters. It's what we do, Nicky, as you know, as Education Secretary, that the children learn from. 2 very quick points. Disadvantaged children need it even more, as much, even more, and they might, and particularly under these AI machines, get the same results, because everybody's going to be able to have an Eton quality education taught by these personalised machines, but they will not get the same learning in the virtues of civility, politeness, conversation, and that's where the public school people will win them over them every time when it comes for jobs. So disadvantaged young people need this even more. And finally, we need the reflection so that our communities, politicians, some of whom talk about cutting up opponents, not good, that we all, whatever communities we're in, we need to devise our own values. Families, sit down with your families and think through what is it that we believe in. Have the children contributing, because the virtues, the values that schools, universities, other communities, if they are to be true, they need to be coming out of the community, and they will amazingly gravitate around the same 6 or 7 key propositions. So, and I just think finally, I think our world sometimes is going crazy, and that this work that Nicky writes about and that Policy Exchange has dignified with an immensely serious symposium on is now as important as ever in our history. So thank you, Policy Exchange.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid that is all we have time for this evening, but I'd like to extend enormous thanks and gratitude to Nicky and to Antony for their words and their thoughts this evening, and also to all of you. And I think we can say with confidence that you are here is an indicator that you have substance. So thank you very much for your time, and do continue to engage with Policy Exchange's education work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.